want to be recorded. So that certainly, there's a huge equity issue just on that sense. There's an equity issue in terms of who can do business, who can't do business. I think most of us would agree that no matter what happens when the pandemic is over, I think our lives have changed forever. Our work lives, our education lives, everything's going to be changing, and we need to be prepared for that as a community. So that's what we've been trying to do. Back in 2015, there was a Tilson report done, and the Broadband Committee was formed, and the town had some recommendations at the time. And at the time, it was to focus on the Pretty Marsh area because they had virtually very little internet access at all. And I think that was a very successful project. We ended up having, I think a blending of what both state and local monies, and Spectrum was a major partner in that. And I personally, I know I benefited from that. I was at my house one day and all of a sudden pole trucks pulled up my driveway and they're stringing cable. So without my knowledge of it. So it's been huge. So now we would just got to figure out what steps we want to take now. We have, like anything, there's a process involved, and it takes a matter of time because we need to make sure we know what our needs are. So we have created a survey that we mailed out to all the taxpayers. We have an online survey as well. And part of that is we're trying to get a gauge of if people are happy with their current service, what kind of service they have. We're also trying to gauge about what kind of speed access they have. They can actually do a speed test and record it, and we can record it and map it. So that's been an important part. So far, we have had over 200 respondents. So we've gotten some good feedback. And just as a quick cursory look at it, we see that 54% of those respondents are satisfied with their current internet.
But we should put a little disclaimer on it. About 54% of the people who responded online. We have a lot, half of the surveys we have back are paper surveys, and we haven't recorded those yet. So.
Right. So, part of the charge is to try to figure out those areas that aren't satisfied with their internet and trying to figure out what do we do about it. That's why we'll also get into the discussion a little bit about emerging technologies. And does it make sense to try to put fiber optic cable everywhere to have all access to fiber optics, or are there other emerging technologies we should be looking at to make sure that we have something that will meet the future and also be as cost effective as possible. We have some guests with us today. We have Andrew Butcher. Andrew is with the Maine Broadband Coalition. Thank you, Andrew, for being a part of this today. We also have Peggy Schaefer, who's the Executive Director of the Connect Maine Authority. And Peggy, thank you so much for being a part of this. We also were going to have Kendra Jo Grindle with the Island Institute be a part of this, but she may or may not be. She's in the process of trying to travel home, and with all the delays and such, last time we knew, I think she was maybe stuck at the Detroit airport.
Well, DC airport.
DC airport.
And she's hoping she's in the air right now.
Yeah, so she may or may not be online. So maybe we should get started. Andrew, I'll start with you. Maybe you can tell everyone a little bit about the Maine Broadband Coalition. I'm sure that there are a number of people that are either here or on the Zoom call that don't really understand what the Maine Broadband Coalition is all about. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. And thanks so much for having me. Really a pleasure to speak with you and get to know some of you better. I recognize a couple names from the coalition listserv, so at least a couple of you sign on to our events and newsletter. Just by way of quick introduction, I actually have two roles. I am both the Director of Innovation and Resilience for the Greater Portland Council of Governments, where I work on our economic development, sustainability, and connected infrastructure work. In that capacity, I serve as the staffing for the main Broadband Coalition. And the coalition is actually a network that Peggy helped start and grew for several years. And I was fortunate to step into a role of coordination and growth about 1.5 years ago. It's a statewide network representing a range of industries, sectors, geographies, really serving as a voice of consumers and a hub of information and resource dissemination, with a growing focus around how to provide support and capacity to community-driven broadband planning and development. There are about 2,500 people who participate in our information sharing and programming. We are led by a advisory committee of about 35 organizations, governmental agencies, private companies, collection of local community internet service providers, and really sort of focus on 3 primary areas of policy, programming, and partnerships. On the policy front, we are very much sort of the tip of the spear for advancing community-oriented broadband policy within the state legislature. And so I think many of you have participated in some of our policy committee conversations and or events. Certainly some of you have responded to our calls to action to engage your state legislators. There's been a handful of pretty significant policy priorities in the last year, not the least of which is the state broadband bond, which the coalition took a lead role in coordinating last year, yielding 75% of the voter electorate last July to vote positively in support of the state's first broadband bond, which is the Connect Maine is now putting to work right now. We also had a pretty important role in shaping the development of the Connectivity Authority, which is now a new mechanism within the state to distribute federal funding, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about. From a programming standpoint, I'm going to drill into it in a little bit, but really serving as the primary partner in coordinating the speed testing effort, which you all have referenced, and I know many of you are participating in, really in an effort to identify crowdsource information collection and identify where there's internet service, who's providing it, and how well it's performing. And I'm sure we'll jump into it in a few minutes. I'll share the current speed testing map. I have generated a speed testing report for MDI, and a lot of the numbers that you've shared already sort of resonate with the speed testing results. We can drill into that in just a quick minute. And then on the partnership front, broadband affects all of us in different ways, whether it's through engaging with our healthcare providers or through distance learning or working remotely. And so the coalition has an important role of expanding partnerships, both geography-wise and sector-wise. And so have launched a series of events and programming to expand awareness and participation among county governments through a regional dialogues effort, also highlighting a range of new technologies and partnerships through a Digital Frontiers webinar series, which is in partnership with the Maine Technology Institute. So again, the coalition focusing on policy, programming, and partnerships. And we have one part-time staff, which is me, and then one part-time, very high-capacity AmeriCorps volunteer through the GPCOG Resilience Corps. So we probably aren't as capable as we would like to be, but certainly it's been a really impressive year of growth. And certainly being able to plug into initiatives and work like you all are doing is important. So again, thanks for the invitation to join, and looking forward to drilling into questions.
Great, thank you. And also with us, as I mentioned, Peggy Schaefer, who's the Executive Director of the Connect Maine Authority. And Peggy, would you mind giving an overview of your organization and how perhaps how you work with Andrew's group?
So we are the state broadband authority charged with bringing broadband to, as the statute says, everybody in the state, and making sure that they're able to use it. So that has two components. One is a infrastructure component, and the other one is a digital inclusion, digital literacy component. We are traditionally funded by a small fee on essentially landlines, which brings in roughly $1 million a year. And recently, they added an additional fee, which this year they expanded. So that should bring in, we are hoping, another $1 million, maybe $1.5 million a year. So starting in January 2022, our annual budget probably should be in the $2.5 million range, which is like a big deal, much bigger than $1 million. And so this bond money is the first money that we've really had to invest in communities. So, you know, as a quasi-state municipal agency, we're bound by statute, and we're also have a set of rules that we have to operate under. We have two basic programs, one of which is a community planning grant. These are grants, I think Mount Desert may have gotten one, but these are grants that support the community planning effort. And it's an iterative process. We are constantly evolving these grants. When I first started this job, we moved to what we call a phase 1 and a phase 2, which is we broke the grants in half, so that there was a sort of a startup piece where communities came in and began to do sort of the community gathering, community thought building, support building, figuring out who had broadband, who didn't, what the needs of the community were, and then a phase 2, which moved into what we call the feasibility page, which was, what is it going to cost us to build out? Who are our partners going to be in that? What is the business model we want to use to build out? And there's several business models. I mean, you guys used one where you partnered with Charter to bring broadband out to Pretty Marsh. I think you're looking at another one now, not necessarily with our money, but with your own money, to expand service to at least parts of the town for town purposes, if not more. So those are our community planning grants. The second phase of that is an infrastructure grant, which is our sort of traditional grant, which is we provide funding to either communities or providers, or a partnership of the two, to bring service to people who are unserved in your community. This year, our board changed the definition of unserved from 25 megabits per second download over 3 megabits per second upload, which is the FCC definition. We changed it to 50 over 10 and redefined broadband service as being 100 over 100. So that really puts us in the sort of top tier across the country of people who redefine broadband to better reflect how people use it. So we have this year, with the bond money, this first round of applications, we awarded about $8.4 million in funding to about 20 grants to cover about 9,000 homes or locations. So that's the essential work of what we do. We work very closely with the Broadband Coalition, both on policy issues to identify them, hopefully come up with solutions, as well as we have been working very closely with them and Island Institute and Northern Forest Center on trying to beef up all of our capacity to help communities do this work. You know, it takes a village to do this, takes a village to build broadband, takes a village to help villages build broadband. And so we are working really pretty across a number of different organizations jointly to figure out how best to do this and how best to provide support to communities. So the Maine Broadband Coalition, Island Institute, Maine Community Foundation, Northern Forest Center, a bunch of economic development organizations, we're all sort of working together to figure out how to do this work better and learn from what we've seen and continue to try to expand our support mechanisms. The speed testing that Andrew talked about was one of the first pieces we put in place sort of jointly last fall. We did it as a pilot project with a program called the Broadband Boot Camp out in the Oxford County area. That was an online camp that we, an online program that we did with Maine Broadband Coalition, Island Institute, Northern Forest Center, Community Concepts, where we helped, I think it was 18 towns. They met basically monthly to talk about sort of how to figure out how to build broadband. So those community broadband groups, we meet with them monthly. It was a really successful thing. We're trying to figure out how to do the next boot camp. And we're also trying to figure out how to expand the resources that we can around mapping to help communities figure out how to identify what areas that they have that don't have broadband, as well as what the cost might be to bring broadband to those areas. So it's a constantly changing process, and we are always trying to improve it. And we have a lot of really great state partners in doing that, and we couldn't do the work without them, because Andrew has one staff working on this, we have two. And so there's not a lot of people working in this field, but I think all of us together make a pretty good team. I think there's probably 5 or 6 of us who, and we must meet several times a week.
Yeah, that's great. And we have a couple of areas of focus that we'd like to get some comments from both of you. And then if there's time at the end, and we could maybe open up to questions from others that are on tonight. We would like to try to finish up by 6:30, just so, because everyone has their own lives to get back to.
Just noticed Andrew has added something here
Yes.
in the chat function. Andrew, this is to let people access that map you were just showing us, I take it?
Oh, I was providing, I will share that link as well. This first link is to the Maine West Broadband Boot Camp, which Peggy was referencing.
Yes.
Because both on the coalition, I'll share a coalition link as well, but this is just helpful resources and links to presentations and some reading.
Yeah. So let's start with, first of all, it sounds like I think we have agreement from Peggy and Andrew that we're not crazy, that we see that's essential to provide broadband, high-speed internet access to all our citizens. So is that correct?
Yeah, and you it's no longer an option. It's like a road.
Yeah.
You gotta have it.
Yeah. Exactly. So then that boils down to a couple of things: is how do we, what kind of technology do we use? And also, how do we pay for it all? And paying for it all, I think, is very complex, because that also involves perhaps some policy decisions and such. But before we do that, maybe we can see what the state of the state is. Andrew, you said something about sharing some speed testing. Is that something you want to just talk about quickly as to what you found so far?
Sure. I don't know that. So I'm sharing a couple links. This link I'm sharing right now just takes you to the Broadband Coalition, and I'll share my screen. So you go to the Broadband Coalition. I don't know if this will get to your state of the state. There's a lot of dimensions to explore in that state. So this will be one dimension. So going to the Connect Maine has sponsored and initiated this crowdsourcing effort, which you go to the Broadband Coalition homepage and you can first take a speed test, which if folks haven't, please do, and get as many of your communities and neighbors and partners to do so as well. This generates real-time data. It just goes, there's one prompt. I know many of you have already taken the test, and it goes to generate some information relevant to the speed of the location where it's being taken. And it creates a data point, right? So here we have a map of this. Everyone's seeing this okay? Sometimes it glitches up a little bit on Zoom, but so shout if you can't hear it, or if you can't see it. Blink if you can't hear me. So here, in general, green is good, red is bad, black is non-existent. you start seeing fairly obvious patterns throughout the state. And again, we've got about 25,000 speed tests, which is maybe about a sixth or a seventh as many as we would like to see. So we got to keep pushing. But we start zooming up to MDI, and we see, I think, about, I'll share the current report, but there's about, I don't know, 248 tests that have been taken on MDI at 206 locations, which is not bad given your population of 2,075 and your households of 997. And you can start seeing some existing patterns, right? So not surprisingly, you've got pretty decent service here in Northeast Harbor. Again, green is good. And each data point allows you to take a look at who's the internet service provider and what the speed at that potential location was. The locations, for those of you that are map and data lovers, the locations will not map exactly to the location where it was mapped from out of privacy interests. It is within a close proximity. So, and there are maps that there are data sets that can be available to those that request it of all of the specific data sets by location if you agree to the privacy agreement, which is on the Broadband Coalition's website. So, it's helpful to take a look at because you start seeing both what's the level of service. So, clearly there's fiber being run along 102 and your Tremont residents likely here are getting pretty decent service for those that have taken the test. This is not really a statistically accurate effort because there's really not enough tests to make a case. But so far the trend is that this is an area where there's been some level of investment, and it may not be surprising that there's decent service. Again, right, I think you said 54% of online survey responders said they're satisfied. That may represent this type of area. And the other important thing about this information set is it reflects the places and people that have been engaged, which is an important thing to work with and work around. So, you also then want to take a look at, well, where are the places that are less well served that are showing up? And again, we're sort of starting to see, for whatever reason, this pocket of community, this pocket of roads is demonstrating some level of service that is less well served. Here we have some tests from Fairpoint, really consolidated, or now consolidated. Another one from Charter. So you've got a mixture of consolidated and Charter communications. My bet is that there's also a good amount of some satellite providers in that are also noted here. So as well as some fixed wireless that are receiving some service. So again, it depends on what you want to find out and where, but this is helpful in, again, both identifying where there's engagement, who cares about it, and what are some known levels of service that you can work with and work around as you start thinking about where you want to try to prioritize enhancing or improving or adding service.
One thing I would also say is some of this stuff can reflect consumer choice. So because of the expense maybe of cable, people have chosen to go with CCI, which has lesser service, or they've decided to go with satellite for a whole variety of reasons. So just because you have a block of areas that are red, that are unserved, does not mean the area is necessarily unserved, because some of this is about consumer choice. That's really evident in an area where you have a lot of connected dots and then a couple black dots. That's usually a sign, not always, but it can be a sign that the people who are at those black dot locations may not be able to afford the connectivity.
So, so the other piece of it that I'd love to hear your point of views from, this is the one thing I hear more than anything from people I chat with, is that it's not a cost effective to think that you're going to run fiber optic to every home. you know, and that seemed, they're emerging technologies, and we shouldn't spend taxpayer money on you know, something that is not as effective as other emerging technologies. And I'm just curious about where you folks stand, where, you know, you're
Well,
probably more on the cutting edge than
I
we are.
have a point of view on this, all right? So I have a point of view, which people can disagree with, but my point of view is this is basic infrastructure. This is like roads. We can't all build individual roads. We need to make sure everyone in the community is connected. Everything goes to fiber, everything. And so building a fiber backbone, building fiber to people's houses is a future-proof investment. There are places in the state and there are places in this country that you're not going to reach with fiber. I don't think any of them are on Mount Desert, where other technologies are probably a good solution. Some of those, the biggest one everybody loves is Starlink. I will fully say I am a Starlink customer. I have property in Lubec where I don't have connectivity. The service has gotten a lot better than when I signed up in November. But everything I read online about Starlink, it's never going to be able to equal the capacity that fiber is going to be able to do. And so the thing is that we're all living in this universe space right now where we have an assumption about use, which is people don't need that much, right? We hear that a lot. People don't need that much. You need more download than upload because people watch more videos than they do sending stuff out to the universe. All of that is true for right now, but the important thing to think about for this public investment, whether it's state money or federal money or town money or a combination of all of those, is what are we building for the future? Because this really is a piece of technology that is going to move your community stay with your community into the future. And so if you think back, not that long ago, right? 20 years ago, nobody needed anything, right? I mean, when we first built the main school library network, you were talking about 256K connection, which was adequate, right? In the late 90s. Now our community, our schools and libraries are talking about a gig up and down. So it's important as we think about this, not to think about it in this moment, but to think about it in the future moment, right? So there are technologies out there that can be a stopgap to build and to add, but you're really trying to make investments that will last the community well into the future. So that's sort of my point of view. It's based on a lot of data I've read, a lot of information I've read, and it really is about spending money wisely now that's going to last this community 40 or 50 years.
Great. Andrew, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
You know, I share that perspective, and I think we as a coalition do as well. And I think that, you know, it's worthwhile saying that place matters. You know, not every place has the interest or orientation of trying to plan and build for the future. And so I think that there's a role for layering and weaving in different technologies to address the needs of a present community that don't discount the needs for the future. And so, you know, I would say that there's a role for thinking about fixed wireless solutions and or low Earth orbit satellite service in remote, hard to reach places where there's not a dependence on any kind of economic, educational, or health dependency for online access. And that is okay for many places in the world, in particular our little corner of the world. And I think it's really important as you think about the deployment of public funding, whether it's at a town, county, state, or federal level, for thinking about the long-term benefit, the long-term return on investment. And I think while certainly, you know, many parts of the MDI economy may not be dependent on digital infrastructure, I think it is important to reflect upon the lessons gained through the pandemic of what does it look like for a local economy when people can't come to or from to visit a place. and how do we ensure that the people in a place have the maximum level of opportunity for working remotely, for learning remotely, for minimizing their unnecessary trips to the doctor. So I think that it's a tough call, and in the policy domain, it's a really tough decision in thinking about short-term benefit and lower cost versus truly the long-term planning and investment and benefit of the community. So that's not an answer so much as just a little bit of perspective.
And I know there are some questions, but just finish up. We're just going to finish up a couple of thoughts, and we'll open up for questions. So, what is your sense? I know that today the feds just signed an infrastructure bill. Do you have any sense at all if that's going to infuse a lot of money into the state of Maine or not?
What's it, 100 million?
No, it's not 100 million. It's 300 million. So this is the thing in broadband in Maine and across the country. We have lived in this universe of scarcity, right? Where we really try to scrimp and save and really do everything, based on an idea of scarcity. With this new federal money between the American Rescue Plan and this new infrastructure plan, we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $350 to $400 million coming to Maine in the next several years. That allows us to shift our thinking from scarcity to abundance. And it allows us to make decisions based on the fact that there are resources there to support the needed infrastructure that this state needs for the next 50 years.
Well, that's encouraging. I am wondering though about, so here we are as a community, we're trying to be actively involved. Do you get a sense, is that going to make a difference on how the money is dispersed? Or is a master plan that regardless if your community's active or not, actively involved, this is how it's going to happen?
So,
oh no, go ahead, Peggy.
So the only thing, this is federal money, right? So
yeah.
What we know about the law is what's written in the law, which is that the first tier priorities is the current federal standard of 25.3. The next tier priorities, I think, is 100/20. And so we will need to see how these rules turn out as the feds implement this. Yeah. And so that is the big caveat around this, is that this is money that's intended to come through the state as grants from the state. So it's through state programs. But there will be federal caveats around that money that we don't know exactly what those are yet.
Peggy, I wonder, I think this may just be a helpful point of reference for folks that haven't sort of thought about it, but I think that's important, and that's why, frankly, the coalition does what we do, and that's why it's important that there's such synergy with Connect Maine and our partners, because we really want maximum flexibility on the rules and for the state to be in the position to be able to determine how best to deploy those funds based upon the need that is identified through communities. And so to your question, I think where there are engaged, organized, and informed communities will have a huge role in shaping where there's the deployment of funds. And there is no better way of reflecting that level of engagement and organization than having a bunch of speed test dots to be able to draw boundaries around and make a case that, hey, there are 100 premises in this area with less than adequate service. We have their information and we have the ability to engage with them and identify that 80% of them would take new service if available to them. So that's where I think we're seeing that is engagement enables organization, organization enables diligence, and that diligence equals insight as to what communities need and can pursue.
Great. So I would encourage people, if they have questions, to put it into the chat, right? So we can see it. But I did notice, Dan, you had your hand up at one point. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thanks. I appreciated the responses concerning universal access, and I agree with that sentiment. I think one of the concerns I have with the level of investment that would have to be made to achieve that is the problem of obsolescence and development of technologies that might potentially render fiber optic cable obsolete. And I wonder if, I know people say that's not going to happen, but can you give us some comfort as to why that's not going to happen?
Because fiber is a very fine piece of glass that you can, which shoots light through, that the data goes on light. And that means that fiber has the capacity to deliver speeds at the speed of light. Now, we can't do that yet. We don't have the technology to do that yet, but theoretically, that is what can be done. And we already know that infrastructure as fiber can last for 40 or 50 years. Now, the electronics on either end, which are right now the governor, so to speak, on how much speed go through, those are constantly being improved. But those are the cheap parts to replace, right? So what they call the GPON and the 10x GPON, those are the cheap parts to be replaced. But that's sort of how the light gets shot through. The basic infrastructure, what gets hung on the poles, is the fiber. And I forget, they just tested it in the lab, and I forget how much they push through a strand of fiber. And a strand of fiber that can deliver data at the speed of light is a hair width. That's how big it is. It's a piece of hair. That's how big it is.
I can speak a little bit to that from the school district. We were successful with using our existing fiber that links all the schools together to connect our high school and consequently all the schools with a 10 gig link by just upgrading some fiber optics and a few switches. So that fiber has been in place for over 25 years now, linking all the schools. It was originally done from Adelphia years and years and years ago. So it's the same fiber. It's gone through a couple of different owners, but we're still using the same fiber, just with new optics on each end.
Yeah, I understand the capacity of the fiber. I guess my question is more, what are the chances that some technology, wireless or other technology that we might not now even envision would come along, which would render the economics of the fiber or the necessity for the fiber obsolete?
Now, certain parts of the island are served now with 5G. We have 5G in areas of Southwest and a few areas in relatively small areas in Northeast and around Somesville. And that service is great, but it's fairly limited in distance.
And it goes to fiber.
Right, it goes back to fiber at some point, but Consolidated makes probably 80% of their money serving backbone infrastructures. Yeah.
So it all, you've been using fiber in this country for cell service and for what's called backhaul, which is, when you send data out, it goes back. So there has to be a backhaul to anyways, that has been fiber for ages.
My favorite saying is wireless is not.
No. Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking about is every hotel in the country that hardwired its routers for internet access. I'm thinking about all the telephone lines we have all around the country that are now being rendered potentially obsolete or partially obsolete by cell technology. And I just, it's just a concern of mine.
Yeah, Dan, I think that it's a fair concern. I mean, if you want to, certainly where we are now is pretty far advanced from where we were 10 years ago, extremely more advanced than we were 20 years ago. And, when you think about projecting where we are now 50 years ago, there's a lot of things that nobody would have been able to predict. So I get that for sure. And this is a conversation we have a lot in the greater Portland region, in a part of the state that is certainly more well served than most other parts. And there are many pockets that are not as well served. And so trying to think about that from a cost efficiency standpoint is an ongoing priority. And frankly, the lens that we have to come back to is that of equity. Because the reality of it is that there very well could be solutions that mitigate the need for the expansion of fiber, in which we think is needed right now, in the future. But we don't know when that could be, and we certainly don't think it's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. And from a policy making and from a community development standpoint, I don't know many folks are really willing to sort of say, you know what, we're going to let this generation of kids not have the ability to get online. We're going to force people to sit in a library parking lot. And so I do think that that's where place matters. And you have to think about the needs and priorities of any given place, which means that you have to do what you all are doing, which is try to understand the needs and priorities of the communities and the place where you're looking at. And I did bring up this this quick. I'll share this real quick just to sort of think about come back to the 5G conversation. So here we have. This is again not comprehensive because there were 6 locations that tested their speed from a cellular device, which would be that which is utilizing 5G. And no one tested anywhere above the 25, maybe 100 megs. And again, six locations is by no means comprehensive.
Right. If you sit right under the cell phone tower in Southwest or right on by Astaku, you can get about 25, but you have to be line of sight, no trees, that kind of thing.
There's a lot of trees on this island.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think we see, right, like 5G has great applications on dense, campuses and airports where there's the ability to have a node every 100 feet.
And it's been really useful too for a lot of boaters that have taken advantage of it.
There was a question that came up in the chat. I just want to point out to folks from Kelly Bellis, how much to big telco and how much to municipalities. And thank you, Peggy, for answering that. About in the statute, there's no division in the funding. So everyone has an equal shot at getting the money if they are prepared to make the application and are prepared to use it.
And importantly, in the federal legislation, there is no prohibition at all against municipal, which we all think is like, of course there wouldn't be. Not so true on that. There's like 16 states that don't allow municipal broadband. And so it was not an insignificant battle to make sure that the federal legislation made it so that you could have publicly owned broadband.
Right. I think a lot of big companies are, of course, at a slight advantage just because they have lots of personnel and lots of experience in applying for it and getting grants and things.
So, what we see in Maine is that, now this isn't true in other states, but what we see in Maine is the municipal model in Maine is that the municipality owns the infrastructure, but contracts out the operations and the ISP portion of running it. So
yeah, you really need those boots on the ground, which most municipalities can't really afford. Yeah.
What is the in terms of the cost of fiber? Is it the fiber itself, and is that price coming down, or is it the cost of hanging the fiber? Is there pole rentals that have to be done, and is there any type of anything that you see as a change in the wind in terms of helping that expense coming down?
Yes. So pole attachment has been a major barrier in Maine, and we've been working on it for about 5 or more years. And so we've made some significant gains in pole attachment in the last 5 years, both in terms of cost and in terms of speed and how you can do it. This year, PUC is undertaking a process which will make Maine among the first in the nation, if not the first in the nation, to move from privately owned poles by CMP and mostly CCI and Versant in your area to potentially a third-party pole administrator. So that removes, first off, it allows the third-party poll administrator to use some of the newest technology around poll attachment, which currently CCI and CMP does not use, right? There's a whole variety of taking pictures and, whole things that you can do now to figure out how, what a poll looks like and how to attach to it. And the second is it sort of removes the piece around you're trying to attach to a competitor's poll. So that will probably be in place. It'll be a bit, but we're making significant gains towards that effort. So that's a big plus. It's not happening right now, but it is in the process of going to happen. All this stuff takes some time. And so poll attachment is about a third of the cost. Poll rental, renting a space on the poll is actually not that bad. It's like $11 a month $11 a year per poll. So it's usually not as big an expense, but poll attachment can be a pretty expensive thing. It's about a third of the cost of a build.
Right. It can also take a lot of time. I know when the project was done out at Cranberry, they opted to just install their own poles just because of the length of delay it would take.
And you can do that on an island. I think it would be very on an unconnected island. I think it would be very difficult to do on that.
The other, just putting the lobbyist hat on here for the Broadband Coalition, that's exactly the type of issue where it's really helpful to have any community engage with their legislator, and let them know that being supportive of that process through the PUC is really important to streamline the cost and increase the efficiency of implementation. So, currently that process is within the PUC. There was some legislation this year to essentially grant even more authority to that process and be supportive of it. That's exactly the kind of issue where engaged communities need to let their concerns and priorities be known to the legislative body.
Yeah, the actual time to install fiber and run the fiber to the poles is not that lengthy. I know this past week, Spectrum ran fiber all the way from Northeast over to the high school and down to Bar Harbor, and the entire project took 2 days to do. So it can be done pretty quickly. So, yeah.
So as a community, we have our broadband committee. We're polling our citizenry. We are trying to get some speed test data. We're now holding public meetings such as today. From your vantage point, are there things that you could see that we could be doing that would help us perhaps move this along? Are we on a good pathway, or are there other pieces that we really should be doing to help us secure perhaps funds somewhere down the road?
Well, I'm a little biased towards this because it's very much what we're recognizing the need to do in the Sebago Lakes area communities right now, which is that more data is better. We have a similar dynamic in that area where there's pockets of pretty poor service. Nobody feels like they're getting good service, but the speed test results that are in don't paint that bad of a picture. And so, but we don't have enough information to really tell. And so our sort of going to be revamping a whole toolkit for promoting and engaging around the speed testing, and also rolling out a resource guide for how to look at that speed testing information and start mapping out possible grant opportunities associated with it. Right. And so, I think step one is getting as many speed tests generated as possible. Step two is then taking a look at that information and trying to understand what is possible with it. And I think that there's going to be some more tools like that available later this fall.
Right. Myself personally too, I'd love to see the island approach this as a whole community rather than separate towns. I think it's a an example of an area where it would make so much sense to just do it as a
Well, also,
community island.
we had interest from, we have a planning grant currently in Ellsworth, and I've had a conversation with Trenton.
Trenton, yeah,
And I think
that
Is
whole
it Lamont
corridor
or
and
Lamont?
island. Yeah.
or the next one on
Des
the other side. it's not
Des Moines, maybe.
Des Moines.
Des Moines, yeah, yeah.
Has also been interested. So
Yeah.
the other thing that you need to, that's really helpful, you know, when Islesboro decided to build out their own fiber network at a cost of about $4 million and bond for it and pay for it with property taxes. The big thing they did was they had a lot of conversations on the island about how important fiber was to that community, and how important a fast internet was to that community. And so that is also, as you're gathering data, you really need, so this is like, if you think, what was that Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point? You need sort of all of those people in place. You need you need the maven, you need the connector, you need all, and you need to really begin to have conversations, a lot of conversations in formal and informal ways about what broadband can do for your area and the importance of universal service and equity. This is really, this is how we raise all the votes, right? It's not just the rich people's votes, it's everybody's votes can get raised by broadband, because the capacity and the ability to be part of this economy, have better access to healthcare, better access to education is really a driving point in this. And so that is those conversations, you know, at the store, at the library, at your sewing circles, at your PT, all of those conversations are really important to begin to talk to your community members about why it is that this kind of connectivity could be transformational for your area.
And do you have any idea about if a community, and I think I heard what you said, Peggy, before, was the model that a lot of communities are adopting are that the municipality owns the infrastructure, right? And you have a vendor who manages it for you. And I assume that whatever fees people pay, a part of that comes back into the town to help pay for the infrastructure. Do you have any figures of percentages, or you know, is there a model at all?
There are lots of models. We don't have, it's one of the things I think it's on our to-do wish list, is to develop sort of the spreadsheet, right? That you can just plug in your numbers that says, if we had a take rate of X and the cost is Y and our revenue stream is Z, then this is the hole that needs to be either filled by grants or by loans or whatever. I will say that the town of Calais and Baileyville, who's created a broadband utility district, they went, and because they were served, they already had cable and they already had CCI in town. They went to a bank and got a loan, and that was based a lot on the work that they did, sort of a spreadsheet, where they determined that if they had a take rate of about 25 or 30%, which is actually pretty low, that they could pay that loan back. And so they got a 2% loan from a local bank to build out their network. The utility district owns it. They hire a provider, Pioneer, to build it, and now Pioneer runs it. It's an open access network so that more than one provider can be on it. They right now just have Pioneer. But that's the kind of work that when we talk about more data is better, that's part of that work, is figuring out those that spreadsheet about, if we had a take rate of X, what is it, what revenue would that generate, and what would that pay back? And there's a lot of model. I mean, Chesterville, New Hampshire, everybody talks about, and we actually just did this in Long Island, and actually in Eastbrook, which is the town is taking out a revenue bond for a portion of that. Consolidated Communications is paying for a portion of it, and the piece that's left They came into us for a grant, and so we're giving them a grant proportion of it, which reduces the amount of money that the town had to borrow.
Right.
So those are the kinds of models that are out there. And really, that's, I mean, like I said, that this really is sort of one of our to-do list things, is as we continue to evolve this community planning, is to figure out how to put those financial pieces in place, so that you guys can pick it up and look at it and say, okay, if we plug this in, and you know, there's like lots of models, there's lots of ways to do it, but essentially it's a spreadsheet.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think we had another, we only have a few minutes left, but we had a question. Could you mind pulling that up? And the question was, how much money is coming into Maine from First Light? I'm not sure what.
First Light owns the Thruing binder. They bought it from Maine Fiber Company. They bought Oxford Networks, so they own a lot of the network out in, which was they were a local telephone company, so they own the network out in mostly in Oxford County. These companies do not share revenue information with us. They don't share much information with us because it's all proprietary. They don't tell us where they serve, how fast they serve. We ask for that information. They don't always give it to us, so we don't know what the revenue stream is for First Light.
And then there's a follow-up on that. It says 80% of
Three-ring binder.
three-ring binders paid by tax money.
So, okay, so this is the history on this, right? So the three-ring binder was paid for by the ERA plan, which was the rescue plan under Obama in 2012. It was, at the time, the state was in a lot of financial trouble, and the state could not come up with a match for that federal money. And so the community, the Maine School Library Network, a lot of ISPs all pulled together and found a small group of investors who are willing to do the match that the feds required for that money. And so that money came in. It was $25 million. I think it had another $5 million match, and it went to create Maine Fiber Company. And there is a requirement, so there is a requirement for the life of the grant, which I think is another 12 years, that they have to maintain the open access, non-discriminatory status that was put in place with the grant.
So Peggy, just sort of looking at the formula that you talked about, both in Long Island and Eastport, you know, sort of, I know there's not quite the sort of plug and play spreadsheet that everyone would want, but I do think that there's a really important formula to distill there, which is that the communities knew what they wanted because they had decent insights into what the needs were. It was pre-speed testing, so they didn't even have that data to work with, or pre-crowdsourcing speed testing. But nonetheless, the communities identified the need, they clarified what their priorities were. That allowed for them to be able to identify local funding to be able to apply towards a project. That serves as a really important hook to the internet service providers. So then you've got a public-private partnership on a local level that identified a gap. And from a state standpoint, that makes it pretty, well, I'm not going to speak for you, Peggy. That makes it, I would imagine, a little bit easier to deploy state funding when there's local funding on the table, private funding on the table, a clear model and a design network that will address the needs and priorities of a place. So I think that formula is a really, really important one to keep in mind. And to your question, as far as other things to keep doing, I shared a link here to a way to communicate and share information that we as a coalition are trying to help support. This is it's sort of like an internal chat group that can be at large for all 2,500 people who subscribe to the Broadband Coalition, or you can designate a MDI specific forum to help continue sharing information. You can attach files, you can share data, you can have an ongoing chat. Think about it as your own Google group, but within the Broadband Coalition, also make sure that you stay on our radar so that we can be as responsive and supportive as possible. And I'm also sharing a link to the resource page in case you haven't taken a look at it. There actually is a pretty significant and growing library of resources, everything from how to go about a municipal revenue bond to a speed testing toolkit. Hopefully, and welcome feedback and suggestions as how to continue enhancing that.
There's also some really great resources online. There's an organization in Michigan called the Merit Network that you can, they have this initiative called the Moonshot Initiative, and they do a lot of really great webinars. So you can sign up for it's their main school library network, and only it's Michigan. But they do a lot of great webinars around financing, around a whole variety of things. The state of North Carolina has a really great online resource for how to do a broadband community, how to build your broadband community and the kinds of actions you should take. So there's really good resources out online that we haven't quite copied and pasted yet, but we will.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our time, and I would encourage anyone that was with us today to keep looking for, we're going to have a series of these public meetings trying to just communicate to everyone as much as we can in terms of what we're doing and trying to get information out there to share so that we all become better informed about this. I know it's been a steep learning curve for me. I can speak to that. We actually have our next scheduled is
August 31st,
Yep.
and we have Susan Corbett joining us to talk about digital equity.
So
Sounds good.
I really appreciate both Andrew and Peggy for being with us. You've been very helpful, and you've been full of a lot of knowledge, and certainly I found it very helpful, and I really thank everybody for being a part of this today, and let's just keep the momentum going, right? Let's get.
Yeah, I mean, you have our email addresses. Email us questions. Yep. We're pretty good at trying to figure out and get answers back to you.
Let's go build that digital equity out there, huh?
Yes.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Good night.
Love the pictures on your wall there, Andrew.
Yeah, I do too.
Home art gallery, beautiful.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Bye, Peggy, Andrew, thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
If one last comment, if you guys have some time
Okay.
here. I do have the guest networks open and available at all the schools. So I would just need to know if you're still wanting to publicize that at some point, and I can bump the speeds up to a higher level if
That
people
would be great.
wanted to know. So
That would be great. When do we have our committee meeting on Thursday? Why don't
why
we
don't we talk about
make
it then?
sure we talk about that?
All right, have a good night,
All right,
everybody.
Wendell, good
Take
to
care.
see you.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.